أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. So last lesson we finished on, or we're going through those things which nullify the salah. We were on number 8, I think, 7 or 8. 6. So, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. So number 6, to cry out loud such that the letters and so here to cry out loud in the salah, it will break the namaz. This refers to linked to the previous one, or the previous thing that I mentioned, that talking in namaz. If you say anything, any words in the salah, it will invalidate the salah or the namaz altogether. So now, when you're crying, for example, you know, sometimes people, there's different ways. Some people just cry quietly. Some people make sounds when they cry. Some be like, oof, some random sounds people make, right? So generally, any sound that you utter, that when you cry, is considered a word that you've said. So hence, it will invalidate the salah. So like I mentioned, you're crying out loud. So obviously you won't be crying like I mentioned quietly, or just keeping it to yourself. Even though that would be makruh for crying over worldly things, just anything that's of worldly. And this one, it's nothing to do with the salah itself. But there's also, like, people would cry especially if they know the Arabic, they know which ayahs been recited. So if they're talking about heaven, talking about hell, and the person might start crying out of the contemplation or fear, that is not considered. Okay, so it'll be just general crying, like for example, someone's crying because they lost something, so a family member passed away, or they lost some property, they had an accident, and then they pray in namaz, and then they remember about that thing and then start crying over that. And that can happen, so that would invalidate the salah if they cry out loud. Next is to say salam to someone with the intention of greeting them. So if obviously someone walks in there, assalamu alaikum, you're like, wa alaikum salam, and carry on praying, the salah will be invalid. I.e., come under the same hukam and the ruling of talking. But this is also, you might be thinking, for example, in namaz you say assalamu alayka, right? You say the attahiyat, may salam be upon you. And your niyat is the guy who over there, you walked in and you say assalamu alayka, and you intended the person instead of the durood sharif, then, or the sending of the salam of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, your salah will be invalid. So that's why it says to say salam to someone with the intention. So intention is obviously from the heart, that's why. To shake someone's hand, and then I did mention about, people put their arm out when someone's trying to cross them, and so on. Best to avoid all movements generally. Okay, so to shake someone's hand would invalidate the salah. To respond to someone's statement by saying La ilaha illallah or the like, i.e., to respond to someone through a zikr. So someone is like, for example, you're praying your salah, and in the background 2 guys are talking, is like, mashallah, I had a son today, and the guy's reading namaz and like, subhanallah, mashallah. Yeah? But he's reading in namaz and he says that, for example, right? Even though he's remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he's praising Allah, but his intention is not to pray his salah. His intention was to, just to congratulate that person, hence the salah will be invalidated. Even if he said La ilaha illallah. Sometimes you hear bad news and people La ilaha illallah. Right? So if you're saying that because of the information you can hear around you and the gossip you can hear around you, then obviously that will invalidate the salah as well. To turn away from the qibla, and to turn away, we spoke about turning away means the chest moving away from the qibla. So now there's 3 or 4, you could say 4 levels. One is to move your eyes like this, to look around in salah. Nothing happens, right? It's better not to do that. Second is to move your head in salah, just like look around like that. That is makruh, and it's a sin to do that, but the salah will not be broken. And the third is to turn your chest away from the qibla, and that would invalidate the salah. If you do intentionally. So, if, for example, I'm just standing there and I do this, like stretching my back. Right? You see people doing that, and that is a common thing, especially someone's had a back day at the gym here, and he's done some deadlifts or something, and he's standing with the namaz and he's stretching his back. That could happen because sometimes people get the adat of doing that, so they're praying the salah, and I've seen people do that in the salah. They'll be standing and they just stretch their back like that. Yeah, so if they turn the chest away from the qibla, which we spoke about, is 45 degrees. So more than 45 degrees, that's out. So if this is 0, you could say that'll be 45, and then over here it'll be 90, right? So 45 to the right, 45 to the left. You have that slight leeway. So if you move more than that, then you've invalidated your salah. That's if you do it intentionally yourself, if you move away. Now, you might be in a scenario, for example, you made your softs for the salah, and someone's broke the wudu, they cross into the soft, and now two people are standing together, that person is trying to squeeze through, right? The best is you try to lean sideways and give the person a space. Because normally they burst through and you end up moving like this. If you move like this when they go through the lines and you're there for more than 3 tasbeehs, 3 average tasbeehs, subhanallah, 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 and you stay there in that time span, then your salah is broken. If you came back within the 3 tasbeeh time, then your salah is valid. But best is if someone is trying to get out of the softs, then you just move a bit aside, you just move your arm up or something and make gap instead of moving your chest from the qibla. So then it says also making dua using words that resemble human speech. So at the end of salah, for example, Rabbi ja'alni muqima salati, this is from Quran. Rabbana atina fi dunya. You can read different du'as like I told you last time. So now someone starts making dua which resembles human speech. Or he says things which you would ask Allah no before. Like you're asking someone, like a person for that thing. So if you use those kind of language and it's not from the Quran and Sunnah, then that salah will also be invalidated because it's considered speaking. But generally, you can use any other dua which is proven from the Quran and from the Sunnah. So it doesn't have to be Rabbi Ja'alni, even though that's the one we normally read. If you know any other du'as, even after Rabbi Ja'alni, you can add a second dua, for example. Yeah, so if you know Rabbi Ja'alni, you read that, then you read Rabbana atina fi dunya, you can do that. There's no restriction on that. As long as you're reading from the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Number 12, to stretch the letter Hamza in the word Allahu Akbar. Even like basic Arabic, the Hamza is for question. Haza, is this, right? So now when is for question. So Hada means this, would mean Haza, is this. Now when you add this before the name of Allah, because Allah starts with the Hamza as well, Allah, right? It starts with the Alif with the Zabar. Now when you add a Hamza to the starting, it will sound like this. Because now there's 2 Hamzas together, so it sounds like Allahu. So in this actually doesn't mean Allahu Akbar, Allah is the greatest. When you say Allah, you add in the Hamza of question. Is Allah the greatest? So this will break the salah because that is basically a kufr statement. Right? That's a statement of kufr because now you're questioning the greatness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So stretching right? At the start of Allah. So people do that sometimes, they're like Allahu Akbar, Allah. People give azan like that. That's haram. Yeah, that salah that azan is invalid, and wajib of iyada to repeat that azan is necessary. Yeah, and the person is sinful for reading the azan like that. So normally you hear elderly people, they might have an excuse if they read it properly once upon a time, and due to old age they might be reading wrong now. But some people they just read wrong and they don't want to amend it because they know it all. And that happens sometimes you try to teach someone about the adhan and they say, I'll go through it with you. They're like, don't worry, I know it. And you're like, you know it. And that's happened to me, I'm saying from experience. There's a number of people that I've tried to help and I've told them that this is what you're saying wrong. And then they're like, but the other guy reads like this though. Yes, but it doesn't matter about what the other guy does, it's about you. So generally, we should try to take, sometimes it's hard to Imam Ghazali rahimahullah ta'ala, when he's asked by his student for nasiha advice, and the first advice, or well, the second advice he gives him, he says to him that it's easy to ask for advice and get told what to do. The hard thing is to do amal on it. Yeah, so it's easy taking advice, but it's hard to do the amal on that. So generally, that's the hard part when the nafs kicks in and someone's telling you that you've done this wrong, and then the ego doesn't want to let go, and like, I don't feel embarrassed in front of all these people. Why should I change for? Because now people are gonna know that I got told off. You know, and this has happened, like, you know, like for example, a third person came and gave us on here, and then if they're really wrong, I normally grab them up and I say, you know, you read the azan wrong, so you know, please fix this up. And because they might be looking around checking, I give the azan, this person, Imam Sahib's holding it up, now that guy's looking, so my besties happened, and even that kind of attitude. And then he's like, no, I'll say right, my Ustad told me like this. And so loads of people have said that to me when I addressed it with them. But that normally is because of pride and arrogance. But so keep this in mind, that stretching, so that's what the tajweed is important. Yeah? So to know how to pronounce the Arabic letters is extremely important. So anyone who's stretching the Hamza in Allahu Akbar, it should be Allah. The lam is down, the Hamza is short. Right? So if they say Allahu Akbar, then that would be a major mistake, and that would be invalidate the salah altogether. Number 13 is a common thing which people do, is exposing the aura of the private part. For a woman, we mentioned that the full private part is her whole body. The only thing by Islamic Sharia that she can expose or show anyone who's not her mahram, i.e. not someone who she can marry. So like a woman can't marry her father, her brother, her son, her nephews, grandparents, right? So these are known as mahram, those who she can't marry. They're her, you could say her family in that sense, who she can, for example, open her hair in front of, who she can be a bit more relaxed, like for example, show her roll her sleeves up and stuff like that. So for a woman, we know it's her full body except her hands, face, and her feet. So here it mentions, what if someone exposes the body parts? And for a man, what was it? From the navel to the bottom of the knees. So a man showing anything from the belly button to the bottom of the knees is haram. To anyone, to your brother, to anyone, whoever it is. You know, guys wear shorts for football and they show their knees. This is haram. Right? So this is something that we need to be aware of. If you know, especially the children who go to, for example, school and they do PE, then you're supposed to obviously teach them the way to go about that. And there's obviously ways to go about it. For example, there's those leggings they can wear, you know, like MMA fighters and all that way, right? I don't know what they're called. But you can wear those underneath and wear them before, especially, you know, in schools. I know it happens in Chonies because I've got feedback from Choni boys that when the boys are getting changed in 4 PE, then they're doing haram things to each other. And that's all I want to say basically. And Choni boys are laughing, so you know what happens, right? So, but as a Muslim, haya is compulsory. It's something that you need to safeguard your haya. Modesty, haya is the foundation of all the other things. If you don't have modesty and haya, automatically, you know, it's not only about your salah is invalid because you uncovered yourself. No. You, as a person, you lose your modesty and character as well. You won't be a person of self-respect, and it has, you know, has like a ripple effect on the family as a whole, and then your standards as a Muslim in general. So you should try your best to be as modest as possible, yeah? And start from a young age, from childhood. You know, even like for example, if you are a baby or at home, don't change the nappy in front. You know, people just do it like in the living room, they sit down, they change the baby's nappy. Yeah, this shouldn't be done, right? Because the child, even at that age, the child has some haya and modesty as well. Yeah, so now you're exposing them, you're removing those natural, the instinct that Allah, fitrah has Allah placed in a child from birth, right? How do you become like, Besharam, for example? A person normally, he wears full clothes. A person who doesn't wear t-shirts and that, right? The day he wears a t-shirt, he feels that his arms are naked. But the guy who wears a t-shirt, if he wears a vest, he feels that I'm a bit more exposed, right? So, the more you kind of expose yourself, the more of modesty you're taking away. Hence, we have people in the West now, they dress, swimwear, you could say, and they be walking around on the streets and basically practically naked. But to them, the haya only exists around the private parts. The rest of it, they think is not modesty, right? This is how you explain the idea of hijab as well. You say every single person has their own, instead of saying that, because in the West, people find it something that we're forcing upon someone, for example, right? So then automatically the giving, or we ourselves as Muslims, we give Islam a negative image. But it should be explained in a more positive way, a more way with wisdom, and at the same time it should be explained with reasoning as well. Right? So like even naturally, for example, the hijab is not only for women, it's for men as well. Hijab is for men as well, to be modest, to cover themselves. But the more you expose, the more immodest you will become. Right? And the Islam teaches you the highest level of modesty. For example, a person says to you, why can't women show their legs? Right? So your answer would be, why doesn't the woman walk around naked on the street? What would they say? That's so inappropriate. That's so immodest. That's what they're going to say, right? If the guy's wearing shorts on the street, no top on, and you say, why don't you take your shorts off and walk like that? He's going to be like, that's rude. I don't want to expose myself. Say, if your modesty is between that part of your body, our Islam teaches us the full body. This is our benchmark and that's your benchmark. Simple. There's nothing about, that's how you explain to logically. So why are you walking around naked? They're going to say, because why? How could we expose ourselves? Right? Say, you feel that exposing direct the private part is exposure. As a Muslim, because I've never done that, to me, even showing my arms, I feel exposed. So I don't feel comfortable the way you don't feel comfortable. This is how you explain it logically to someone. But obviously, bottom line is because it's far than us. Allah's hukam, we follow it. That's command. But there is wisdom behind all these things. So here I mentioned that, the nakedness of a person, the reason why I mentioned this, because a lot of lads, when they come to read namaz, is, and I mentioned this like last time as well, when you go shopping, you buy clothes that are appropriate, you get salah in them. So what happens? They go in sajda, and then the people at the back, they're not very pleased. And I get to complain on Jummah all the time, imams are telling the people to dress properly. They know what they do wrong. Like, it's just common sense that that because that same guy who's all his back is showing, right? He's sitting there doing this as well. So he knows he's exposed. And then why wear those clothes in the first place? So here, in the footnotes, they give you a lot of detail, like what would be considered. So they mention here, each limb, if you expose one quarter, so one quarter of each limb. So now they put the body in portions. For a woman, for example, because her arms are part of the aura, will be the wrist and the forearm is considered one part. So a quarter of this is shown, right? That will be obviously about this much, right? Then she had until 3 tasbihat. If she doesn't cover it within subhanallah, 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 that much time span, then her salah is invalid. But if she purposely uncovers it in the salah like this, right, and then her salah is invalid because she's done it intentionally. So for a man, which applies to us, normally our private part of a man is from the bottom of the knees to the navel. So they mention here that what's covered, the part around the navel, you can say where you wear your belt, for example, right? So not up to your private parts, above that, up to your belly button, all the way around is considered one whole. So a quarter of that is exposed, which would be if you went down and all your back was showing, then definitely a quarter is exposed, so that salah will become invalid. And obviously if you're doing for 3 tasbeehs, and normally you expose yourself in sajda, so sajda is definitely 3 tasbeehs. So then your salah is invalid, those people need to pray their salah again. But if you try telling them then you see what happens. Right? Only Allah can judge me. Yeah, so that's the answer you get. But your job, if you see someone doing that, then I have to respect, obviously there's wisdom how you tell the person. You like, I've seen some elderly people, they tell the person, oi, what are you doing? The guy gets offended, he's like 25 years old, who's this guy shouting? And someone came to me and said to me, first time I came to the mosque and this guy shouted at me, I could be from road, I don't know these things. But so sometimes it might be that the person's first time came to the mosque and you're just going full bash at him and he's like, what the hell? I thought I'm turning to God, yeah, but this is the wrong place I came to. So sometimes you might say to the wrong person at the wrong time and you could cause them to slip up on their iman and i.e. go fully off track. So always tell people, whenever you tell them with wisdom. You look good as well telling them, like for example, people always do some funny things in the mosque. So normally what I do, I say, can I just, speak to you in a side room, I take them there, I say, you've done this, and you shouldn't have to do it like this. Some be offended still, some don't. Some be like, thank you, but some be offended. But at least I never expose them or shame them from people, they can't say that. So it should be done with wisdom. So if 1/4 of each part is shown, then your salah will be invalid. So the knee and the thigh, they come in one. So if you're praying salah in even 3/4, for example, sometimes the 3/4 are just about below your knee. Now if you do salah in them, because you're bending in legs, naturally it goes up, right? So the knee and the top of the knee, the lower part of the thigh, it might be exposed. If that happens, more than 3 taslees, that's definitely 1/4 of the part, so your salah will be invalid. So you need to keep these things in mind. Number 14 is to carry or have filth on your clothes, which we mentioned. The excused amount of impurity on your clothes, like blood, urine, vomit, poo, for example, right, is 50p size. If more than 50p on your clothes, then you need to change those clothes. There's not valid reason. It's not valid to pray salah in those clothes. But obviously, like we've done this on page 61 anyway, but if that's the only clothes you have, then obviously you pray salah in those clothes instead of no other clothes. But if you have alternative clothes, you change those clothes or you wash them and pray in those clothes. Number 15, to do any action before the imam does. So imagine the imam went into ruku, right? And before he's about to go in the ruku, some guys know that he's going to go and they'll be in a rush, so they go in the ruku before the imam. If the imam doesn't meet them in ruku and he gets up before the imam, i.e. he's one action ahead of the imam, his salah is gone. Right? So you have to meet the imam. Like for example, you went to sajda before the imam and then you got up and then he went down for his sajda. Then you joined him on the second one. Now you missed the sajda, you missed the fard with the imam, so you beat him to it. So that will invalidate the salah. And there's more intricate detail to this, but I'll keep it simple, so at least we know not to go past the imam. It reminds me of sometimes, this. I remember when I was in madrasa, there's one of these brothers. He walked in late in the mosque, right, and everyone just standing up sorting the lines out. So he thought he's late. So the imam went Allahu Akbar. And people come rush and they're going to ruku straight away, right? He came right to ruku. And everyone's just doing Allahu Akbar. And so he's soft. And he's literally right in the middle of the soft in the ruku. And then everyone's like, what's this guy doing? So all the guys around him started laughing, and obviously their salah broke as well. But sometimes, you have to be a bit more careful. So if that person, he got up, for example, he continued, he can still continue his salah, but he'll go back now. He'll go back, join the imam. Then when the imam goes ruku, then he'll go ruku again. But if he doesn't and he skips it altogether, he thinks he'll come past him, and I'll just get up and wait for him, right? Then he missed it altogether. If he goes back, like for example, I did the sajda before the imam, then I realized, okay, look, I've done it before him. Either you wait in the position and then you catch it up, or you go back, join him, and then come back with him again and do it with him. Right? But if you miss it altogether, then your salah is invalid. So sometimes this can happen when you're not paying attention. So, ulama, most of these rulings, imams right, because someone's literally experienced these things. So these things will happen. And you'll be shocked at like the funny things that can happen. Yeah, so number 16. So if you missed a fard of the namaz, like for example you missed one sajda and you never done the sajda again, right? So for example in the first rakat I did one sajda, then at the end of the last one I just do 3, make up for the one I missed, because both sajdas are fard. If I didn't do it all together, or missed my ruku altogether, carried on, read my namaz, finished it, even if I done the sajda, forgetfulness, because I missed the fard, my salah is invalid, because I missed my fard altogether. So normally they just mentioned here that all of these are normally before the last at-tahiyyat. So broadly speaking, all of these will generally, every single one will apply before the last at-tahiyyat, because why up to there is everything is fard.
What in reading witr, if you misreading dua qunut and you realize.
Yeah, so for example, because dua qunut comes in the wajib, right? So even if you missed it, or sometimes you forget, you're going to ruku and you remember, oh, I'm supposed to do my dua qunut in my 3 witr, right? You just carry on praying, and then you do your sajda forgetfulness. Why? Because that's a wajib only, it's not a fard. Yeah, so that's how you do your dua qunut, because that comes in the wajib. So that's why it's important to know which things are fard, which things are wajib. At least know those two. If you miss a fard, then you definitely need to make that up. Otherwise the salah doesn't count. If you miss a wajib, you need to do sajda sahal, and the rest will all fall into sunnah. So if you miss them and you don't know if, because you never memorize the sunnah list, like generally people won't memorize the sunnah list because that'll be like all the different various actions of the salah, where to look, this, that. But if you just do the main fard and the wajib, then all the other ones you're doing generally will fall into sunnah. So you know if it's not the fard list, it's not the wajib list, then sunnah, your salah is still fine.
So you don't make up the dua qunut, you don't stand up and make up.
Because now, if you miss dua qunut, for example, you went to ruku and you remembered, ruku is fard, so now you can't reverse from a fard to a wajib. Yeah. But if you missed, for example, you missed the ruku, you went to sajda, now you missed the fard, so you can go back and do the fard and then come back for sajda, because you're going from a higher version, like a fard action, to back to a fard action. But you can't go from a fard to a wajib or a fard to a sunnah. Now you made another mistake. Why? Because you abandoned the higher one for a lower. You get it? So now you added it onto the mistake. So if you just carry on going, even if you did go back, for example, someone went back, they didn't know, they went back, they did it, they still have to do the sajda sahal. Because now they did 2 mistakes. One, messing the order out, and second, that they abandoned the wajib, fard, and went back to the wajib, and then so on. Next, it mentions things that are disliked, makruh in namaz. These things are disliked in the salah, but the salah is still valid. Okay, so number 1, to deliberately miss a wajib or a sunnah action. And so, I already mentioned this point already, but if you purposely miss a wajib action, you need to read the namaz again. You still carry on praying, you still finish it. You don't be like, oh, I missed it on purpose, still I'll break it, and then no. You still pray to the end, and then you pray the salah again. Yeah? So that's one thing. If it's a sunnah action that you miss deliberately, then you've committed, it's like a minor mistake. You are sinful for missing a sunnah out deliberately, but the salah will still be valid. And so these two are slight differences. So if you purposely miss a fard, obviously the namaz is gone. You purposely miss a wajib, you still carry on praying the salah, you finish it off, but you need to repeat the prayer. If you miss a sunnah by purpose, then you are just sinful, the salah is still fine. Number 2, page 86. It says to fiddle around with one's clothes, body, or without excessive movement. I explained to you what excessive movement was. When someone walks in and they think you're not reading namaz. So imagine I was standing up and I was like doing this, showing my hand out in the middle of the prayer. You know, some people do that, they like, my heart's about full of this. If you walked in and I was doing this, would you think I'm praying? No. So that is considered a major action. So anything someone walks in while you're doing that and they think you're not praying, that means it's a major action. Same with guys pulling the trousers up like this, right? They're reading namaz, you start doing this. Now, that'll break the salah automatically. But anything lower than that, right, there is still makruh to do it. Like I mentioned, that anything lower than that, it doesn't break. Like for example, someone's doing this, right? Now, just fidgeting around will break the salah. So if someone's doing this, for example, people start getting a bit like presentable in the namaz like this. This is unnecessary. So hence, it's makruh, and you do lose reward for fidgeting around in your salah like this. So this is unnecessary, moving around, so it's not allowed. And they also mention that it's makruh tahrim. It's close to haram to do that, right? Because there's no valid reason, no reason to do it, and so you're just fidgeting about. One could be, for example, your collar is tight and it's poking you, right? So you really can't concentrate in salah. Sometimes this happens, and because you're wearing it really tight, and you think, I'll just flip the button and quickly open because I'm finding it hard to breathe or whatever, right? That would be one minor move because you're still focused and you just flip the button open. And that was a valid reason because you had something, you couldn't breathe properly or the collar was too tight, for example. But just sorting it out like this, that's considered unnecessary. That's what it's referring to, right? So that'll be a sin to do that. And the mention is makruh tahrimi. Makruh tahrimi is just one level under haram. Yeah, so keep that in mind. Another one they mentioned here is wiping away pebbles on the ground except for sajda. This refers to, like, for example, when you're doing sajda on the floor and there might be something in the way. So if you're praying on the street, and those who ever prayed on the street before, when you're standing up, it doesn't look like it's going to be hard. Once you go down and put your head on the floor, there's always like a little stone there poking your forehead and it kills, right? So you can basically, once you're going down for sajda, like obviously the first time you've got up now because you've experienced it. Now before you go that second time, you can just brush it like this and then put your head down. That is fine. But now just moving things like this in the paper on the floor is not going to cause you any issue, and you're just doing that to the paper, trying to clean your way, or you're probably at home, like for a mother, for example, she's praying a salah and their child is just walking around, throw the dummy and something, you're like just dashing it about like that in the salah, right? That is not allowed, and that would be considered as minimal.
So if it's such that and there's like a little stone and it hits you, you get up quickly before 3 tasbih, you go back down.
Like even like for example, that's a good example, right? So imagine you went down in sajda, you put your head down, as soon as you put it down, you start hitting your forehead. You got two options. One is you carry on doing it, the sajda, but reading 3 tasbeehs is sunnah. The farther level would be as long as your forehead and nose touch the floor, right? So as soon as they touch the floor, you say subhanallah, and here you can just get up, right? As long as your farther will be done. But if you gone down and either you're going to stay there, finish the 3 tasbih off and feel the pain, or you get up and whilst you're getting up, you know it's there now. So you just brush it off while you're getting up, or when you're going down, you brush it out the way and then you go down and do your second one. What you can do is, you've gone down, it hurts, but for example, you can just do that, because your hands are going to be right next to your face anyway, so you can just brush it, like pick your head up and brush it and then go down, because obviously you feel that you're not completing your sajda, right? But you still be considered in sajda. And when we spoke about sajda, as long as your head is close to the ground, that's considered you're in the boundary of sajda, you haven't got up yet. So obviously when you can lift your head, you're not going to sit up all the way, brush it, then go to your sajda again, right? It's just going to be a slight lift, maybe enough to slide your hand underneath and just move the thing out the way and then continue your sajda. So that would be fine as well. Another dimension here is to crack your knuckles. This is generally makruh out of salah as well. Yeah, so it's makruh tanzihi, minor makruh out of salah, and makruh tahrimi to do it in salah. So when people crack their knuckles, that shouldn't be done. Next, to place one's hands on the hips. This is also makruh generally as well, but it shouldn't be done in salah as well. Because folding the arms in namaz, it's not fard, it's not wajib, it's sunnah. Hence, there's difference of opinion of the Sunnah. Some say the Prophet ﷺ, according to some narrations, placed his hands here, some below the navel. According to Imam Malik, the Prophet ﷺ never folded the hands here. The Sunnah is to not fold the hands, so they stand with the arms unfolded. So now if someone's standing like this in namaz, right? Because obviously the arms is not fard. So now if someone does this, is makruh. Right? Makruh tahrimi to stand like that in salah, is it? Against the adab of the salah. And it's a sign of like, can't be bothered, I'm so tired. It's kind of that lack of attitude as well. Right? But it'll be slightly different for a person, for example, he's got back pain, an old person, and he was standing up and he's still trying to read, and he's like his side's hurting, so he puts the arm there. That is slightly different than a person who's normally fit and healthy and he's just standing like this. Yeah, so just, I don't know why someone would do that, but it might have happened somewhere. Next is to turn one's neck. We've already done this, I explained it when you're looking around. Is makruh tahrimi to turn one's neck. To sit up, to sit with one's knees up. Right? And this would be like, you know, the way you put Sunny style, you make it do a kukri and the grab it. Yeah? A bit like that, but with your backside on the ground. Yeah? So instead of being floating in the air like a kukri style when you hold your ears, right? Then, but same style like that, but with your back, a bit like that, yeah. No, but generally, that's in namaz is makruh. Like for example, that sitting what he's doing now is a sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. That's a sunnah to sit like that. You know, when people fold their arms like this around there, right? Like for example, also getting like a chadar and wrapping that here. Why? Because not all the time, people, like now we have chairs in our mosque where it's so relaxed, right? Even if you get tired, pick up a chair. But in them days, it wasn't like that. So how would they recline on something? They wrap the chadar around and their knees, they pick the knees up and put it around the back so you're basically balanced, right? So your feet will be down and the chadar will be around here, so that's allowed. Or they would fold the arms around the knee, so that gives you a balance. So it's kind of, you're relaxing in a way. It's better than just sitting up and you feel a bit tired. So that was the sunnah way to sit as well, so that's fine. Yeah, so there are a few sunnah ways that you can sit. The Prophet ﷺ would sit like that in the mosque when he would contemplate like that as well, the way he's sitting. Yeah, so that is the sunnah way to sit. So even as a side note, you know, like during the Jummah khutbah, when the khutbah, first people fold their arms like this and then they put their hands like this. Technically, you can sit in any sunnah position, right? So in any sunnah position, if someone was saying like that, Islamic, I can't say to him that's bad or he can say it's sunnah to sit like this. And the Prophet would sit like that and reflect and contemplate. So he, like, you know, we say muraqabah karna, yeah? So we sit down and he would reflect and contemplate like that. So a person is in Jummah khutbah, he can even say like that. The reason why people do this and this, it's not because it's in Quran or Hadith. The reason why they do that is to keep them focused. Yes, why? Because it's a gunnah to talk while the khutbah is happening. Even if someone is calling you, you ignore them, you blank them, you can't read tasbihat, you can't even read your sunnah and nafals in that time. So what they do is they just do this to keep themselves focused and but the best way, and I've seen my teachers, that either you sit at tahiyat through both of them or like this. And sit at tahiyat style but with your arms like this and just contemplating and listening. You don't have to do like this and this. But if you did that, then at least shows that you're paying attention.
Say when you sit in the chair, and you like stand up and the mom's reading, but when you go sit, so you sit down on the chair. Say if you want to go on the floor, sit on the chair first, but then you go on the floor.
That would be allowed, yeah, but that person, his salah doesn't count. Because there's no reason for him to have a chair. People do that, they sit on the chair, then they go on the floor as well. The reason for the chair is because you can't go on the floor. Right? If he's standing and he's going on the floor, then obviously his salah is invalid to sit down and pray. Right? So that person is not allowed from that anyway. If you can't stand, then you read it all in a namaz sitting down, for example. Right? And if you can't do sajda, then you do namaz sitting down as well. Yeah, or you can stand it up and do just like the ruku and sajda standing up. But there's no idea of standing and sitting as well. Some people do that, right? That logically doesn't make sense. Why? Because the only reason you can do that is when you can't do one of the actions like a sajda, for example. Right? So people shouldn't do that. Especially if you can sit on the floor and pray, because after namaz or before namaz you're sitting down, crossing your legs, chilling in the mosque, and then you're using a chair, your salah doesn't count as well. Right? So a lot of people use chairs without a valid reason. And the funny thing is that before the namaz they sit on the floor chilling, and namaz and they grab a chair and put in the saf. Right? It doesn't make sense. Those people, their salah is invalid. Another thing they mentioned, to put your forearms on the ground during sajda, and like I mentioned, during sajda, your body should be spread out. For a woman, the sunnah is to keep the body close together, right? And then here I mentioned that putting the forearms on the floor is makruh tahrimi, major sin for men, but he mentioned it's sunnah for women. Why? Because we spoke about that sunnah because of the modesty aspect. To roll one's sleeves up. Yeah, so to roll the sleeves up is makruh. Another thing which is makruh and something very important is folding the trousers up. You know, people fold the trousers up and they say it's gunnah to read namaz with their trousers below your ankles. There is a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that prohibits men from wearing trousers that go below the knees, ankles, sorry. Yeah, so that's why you generally see sunnah clothing, right? For example, it'll be higher than the ankles. Yeah, in English they call it Jacobs or something like that, something like that, right? But they try to use derogatory terms. But if you look at the modern fashion, men's trousers are designed to be below the ankles, and women's are designed to be above the ankles, right? But this is again opposite of the Islamic position. But going back to the men's one, obviously women, they need to cover up anyway. But for the men, generally the jeans that we have, the reason for the prohibition was because in them days people were poor. It was one of the reasons. And people used to have longer clothes, like, like if you look at it, like even movies that represent olden days or kings and emperors, they always show they have a long garment dragging behind them. That's a sign of arrogance, that look how rich I am, I even got this silk clothes dragging on the floor behind me. Whereas the poor person, he just have enough to cover himself. So it's a sign of pride and arrogance. So the Prophet ﷺ prohibited them wearing the trousers going below the ankles. Then was Hazrat Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anhu, he's questioned that, because his trousers would go below his ankles. Why? Because his trousers were loose on his waist, right? So the Prophet ﷺ said, in other words, I don't want to quote the hadith wrong, but to the effect that you're not doing it out of pride and arrogance. So that's where the ulama get the ruling that if someone's doing it out of pride and arrogance, then it's gunnah for him to wear his trousers below his ankles. But if you just bought a normal tracksuit and it's long, there's no issue with that. As long as you're fully aware that you got no choice, right? But if you, for example, you get salwar piece made, then because you're getting them tailor-made, most cases then you should get them made accordingly. But if it's normal Adidas, whatever people wear, jeans, you have no really control. And the way they design from the bottom, if you cut them, then they're gonna get messed up and they're gonna look funny, they're gonna look worse, whatever, right? So in that case, it's allowed. But what's not allowed, like I mentioned here, is rolling up your clothes in salah. So same with people who fold their trousers, that's makruh. Because they say, you ask the person, why are you folding your trousers? First thing he's going to say is because the Prophet ﷺ prohibited men from wearing the trousers below the ankles. So simple reply to the person is, so in namaz you're going to follow Allah's command, and after namaz you're going to ignore it. You get it? So that's, you're only doing it for the namaz. That's one angle to see it. If mine's long, it's long. I'll try to buy appropriate clothes. If it happens to be long because the botian is like that, then in salah is like that. But you know in your heart you're not doing pride or arrogance. But now the guy who's folding, he's trying to throw fatwa around and show that I'm extra religious, I'm following this sunnah, these guys, look at them. Now he's only following it in the salah. After the salah, he's as soon as he walks there, he doesn't even get up from his place. He unfolds them and walks off. But the hadith of folding them or having them above the ankle is not in for namaz. It's general hadith for men. Right, that's one thing. Second thing which is makruh, the Prophet ﷺ, to wear clothes inside out. So now when you're folding them, what are you doing? You're putting them inside out. Right? So that's why it's makruh to fold the trousers. If they're long. So the first or the best position would be wear short on in the first place. Second, if they're long, you leave them. You got no choice. And the wrong thing is to do, if they're long, you fold them. And that's makruh to do that. Right? That links in with this one. G. Wow. So you have a question. Number 10, for men to pray in only trousers. Like we know, men from the navel to the bottom of the knee should be covered. So it's makruh to wear or pray salah with only your front part covered and then no top on and stuff like that. Hence, the more you cover, the more adab and respect it is. That's why traditionally we are told that praying salah in a t-shirt shouldn't be allowed. Is makruh, is disliked. Don't pray salah with a t-shirt or a vest on. But if you go to certain cultures, that's not deemed as disliked. For example, Morocco, the jubbah are designed to be up to their elbows or up to the, that's the way. Why? Because of the heat and the culture is like that. So they design like that. So for them, wearing sleeveless or like a vest, they consider that disrespect to the salah. Whereas in, for example, in Pakistan, the culture is to wear up to the wrist. So when someone walks, prays salah with a t-shirt on, then they say this guy's being rude. Why? Because his normal practices that we wear up to the wrist, and in the salah, how dare he wear or show a sign of disrespect towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But this will be makruh tanzihi or the low makruh. Another thing they mentioned, same with covering the head. Right? It's always makruh if people don't cover the head in the salah. Obviously that's with a valid reason as well. Right? So sometimes you might have a valid reason not to cover your head. But if you know the sunnah, then you should try to adapt the sunnah generally to keep your head covered. You might not know the wisdom behind it, generally throughout life, thinking why we have to cover our head. But there is wisdom behind it, so especially as men, you know, we're easy to point fingers at the sisters. Well, she doesn't wear her hijab, she doesn't do this, she doesn't do that. Her hijab is equivalent to our growing a beard, for example. That's how we should treat it. So, like, we know, especially in the West, like when they say Islam forces women to wear the hijab when they don't want to. Right? There's certain things that Islam tells us to do that we have to. Men, for example, are instructed to grow their beard. Right? So now, if you're not growing a beard, it's hard enough, it's tough look. Right? So it might be hard to digest, but you have to do it. So that's important to keep in mind. Even though there's a difference of opinion of what is considered a beard, how much is allowed, I'd rather just let them know now that I mentioned the topic. And so shaving, clean shave is haram. That's what the ulama mentioned. That's a no-go. Then the second level, or the stricter opinion you could say, is that it should be one fist. The beard should be one fist. That's the stricter opinion. There's no hadith to say grow your beard one fist. Yeah, this is people misunderstand this. There's no hadith that says that. There's hadith that says that don't shave. Shaving is not allowed. But there's none that says it should be one fist long. They get that from one of the verses of the Quran Kareem, and one of the prophets grabbed the other prophet from his beard. So they derive from there, if he grabbed his beard, then that was a sign that it must have been a fist big. That's one evidence. Another evidence is that one of the Sahaba Ikram, when they used to cut their beard, that he would grab his, just grab his beard in a fist, and anything extra he would cut. That's what he would do as the Sahabi. But it doesn't say that's what should be done or that's the minimum. It doesn't say like that. It just says that's how he would cut his beard, and so hence is in a hadith, so it's sunnah to grow your beard at least a fistful, right? But the other opinion is that anything which is considered that someone looks at you and say you have a beard, right? That'll be considered a beard. So the ulama putting that into lengthwise, they would say like, you know, maybe like 2 fingers or this like just bigger than a stubble, you could say, as long as you're not resembling women, right? A clean shave, it resembles women. That's one of the reasoning behind it as well. For obviously it's feminine to do that. So at least like,
or like a goatee.
alright, so another thing would be, okay, the length is minimum. The ulama mentioned like, you know, as enough someone to say this guy has a beard, for example, right? So imagine us, I don't know, 2 centimeters. Now, where's the restriction of the beard as well? You get some brothers, mashallah, yeah, they think they are the deen, the daddies over here, right? Growing from here. And you see people like that, don't you? Yes. And why? Because the hadith says that let your beards grow and trim your moustache, right? So what to do? He says, trim your moustache, so they go and shave it, right? And then they have a clean shaved moustache, and they have the beard coming out from the face, all over the eyes, all the way here. And what's the evidence? They say, Hazrat Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anhu, he never used to trim his beard from the bottom. But I'm sure that, logically speaking, we know that Hazrat Abu Bakr Siddiq, a man of great intelligence, the best of people after the prophets, right? Radiallahu anhu, I'm sure his beard is presentable. You know, some people naturally have a beautiful shape up. They don't even need to do a shape up. They naturally have a nice beard, right? My understanding is that his beard was naturally nice. Hence, because why to look scruffy and to look messy is against the sunnah. The Prophet would have told the person off that this is unpresentable. This is, you know, is unhygienic, for example. Right? So the Prophet, Hazrat Abu Bakr Siddiq, used the evidence. But the ulama mentioned that Allah has given us an aql as well. The guy who's growing his beard here, he says that anything goes in your face is a beard. Hazrat Abu Bakr Siddiq, he never trimmed his beard. So his beard's gone here, he's all over the place, right? But logically speaking, anything that grows on your beard, a face is a beard. The ulama mentioned beard is defined as anything that's on your bottom jaw. Right? So like for example, this top part is not on my bottom jaw. So even if I went low and just had it here, then you know, like people have just a bit more than a pencil beard, for example, right? Then as long as it's on your bottom jaw, that's considered what's compulsory or necessary. That's the first thing. Second thing is that your wife has a haq to your face as well, right? So generally speaking, she has a right to your face, so she never married, you know, I don't want to say any animal name, but you know, the way we naturally want our partners to look presentable, they need someone to look presentable as well, right? Yeah? So, and they have a right to your face. I'm sure that's isharas enough, yeah? So they have a right to you as well. So bearing all the different wider aspects of the sunnah in mind, placing all these rulings in mind, right? Then you get to a conclusion of how the beard should look. Yeah?
What about people who have difficulty growing beards, like obviously patch? Are they allowed to clean shave and keep it full?
No, generally, like for example, anything that grows on your face, i.e. that part, like I mentioned, the beard section, right, the bottom jaw, you could say, that is considered your beard, right? Even if it's one hair. Imagine, you know, some people, naturally the beard doesn't grow, right? Even if one hair grew, or you know, the really faint, soft hair, and they didn't grow long, they're just like 1 centimeter, and they're just really small, soft hair, right? That's that person's beard. He gets the reward of having a proper full beard. Yeah? There's a narration mentioned that a Sahabi, he would have one hair, and the angels would swing on that one hair. And then he'd remove that one hair, and then, you know, naturally, like, it is just one hair anyway. And then the Prophet ﷺ didn't look at him the way he would, and he inquired, Ya Rasulullah, why is this? He said, I would see angels hanging on that one hair. Yeah, that was his beard, and that's how it is. So whatever grows, let it be, and at least, right, have like a stubble, you could say, a grade, I don't know, might be like a grade 3, grade 4 at least. If you do that, and it doesn't, like for example, because the bottom jaw, I know like people want to fit in, like sometimes it depends on your job as well. You might be working in a place where you might feel that you're gonna look like in the Western world like a terrorist, and like all these accusations people put on, and so you might feel a bit, I don't know, a bit risk or uncomfortable or whatever, right? So for example, because this is not your beard, like technically speaking, look, mine here is not even like, it's like just 1 centimeter, like, you get it? Yeah, so you can just blend it in. So if you get your skin fade done, your hair done up, right? Then you can just blend it in the sides, and then the main part is here that you need to focus on and keep it long from here. So even it's 2 fingers here and it's all blended in, it look like you say modern designer beard, but at the same time you know that you're fulfilling the minimum requirement of having a beard according to the Sharia, for example. So both things will be covered, your design, your fashion, you're not feeling uncomfortable as well out there, and you know that the reason why you got it is, so the best way would be like, for example, if you grew this middle part, right, naturally if you grew this middle part to 2-3 fingers, you'll realize how the rest blends in, and you'll automatically have that blended in and it look like a nice, neat, presentable beard. But inshallah we stop on this, but generally like all the discussions aside, the legal way and this and that, I asked my teacher, peace and once, about a beard. I said, what's the actual ruling? Because I was new then in the madrasa. Mine was like Ismail size, like 2-3 fingers, right? And then I was like, you know what is the hukum on a beard? Like, I was a teenager, I was 18, so I was a bit rebellious, a bit on that vibe as well. And then I wanted to know, like, what is the actual simple answer they gave me, which was sufficient for me to just grow my beard. They said to me that, have you ever heard any prophet who cut his beard or shaved his beard and made his beard smooth? Anywhere have you ever read that? I said no. They said, have you ever read any Sahabi did that? I said no. Have you ever heard any Imam say any Sahabi did that? I said no. They said, have you ever heard any of the 4 Imams, Imam Shafi, Imam Malik, the great Imams, did any of them do that? Have you ever heard any other great Imams of the past do that? And then they said, if you haven't, then what other evidence do you need? Yeah, so this should be our benchmark with those people. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the way women have their hijab challenge of wearing your workplaces and stuff like that, same way, consider the beard your challenge. If you feel uncomfortable, if you expect the women to follow the Sharia and dress modestly, then we should do our part as well. And then when we make that sacrifice for the deen, Allah, imagine someone's married and the wife doesn't, for example, wear hijab, or he wants her to wear it and she doesn't wear it. Just us changing ourselves, growing our beard maybe for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, just for that sake, Allah could change her heart and inspire her to be modest. And so, it starts from ourselves. It's easy, especially in our culture, that we're trying to put it on the women and we're out cheating ourselves, doing all the put here. And then we're like, women should be like this, they should dress like this, behave like this, go to these places, they can't go here. And then we're in those places ourselves, places of blame, places, where they could be accused, or you could be accused of being in the wrong place. So, so if you, inshallah, better yourselves, then automatically Allah give you awlad, the family and the whole, and your circle around you automatically get the vibe. Why? Because the barakah that you're getting, they'll automatically benefit from that as well.
Well, when you explain the, shaving and you mess it up and then you end up shaving, it's happened to me a couple of times.
If you messed it up, then you messed it up, then you
Are you sinful for that then?
For
If
example,
you completely for shaving up, then you just trim it to the bare minimum, so it's
sometimes, like for example, imagine like you got beard like, I don't know, grade 8, and the clip falls off and you do a clip as 2 or 3 maybe. Because sometimes it happened it happened to my father. He went to a new barber and my father's got a full beard, and this is very recent as well. And he went to a new barber, and a Turkish one, and that guy basically he did grade 1 or something, grade 2, straight down my dad's beard. Yeah, but that could happen, right? But it's by your niyat and intention. And then obviously straight to obviously my father left it like that, and then he just waited for it to grow out, and then he grew back. So that could naturally happen, but there are valid reasons like it might fall into that. I'm not saying that people doing it on purpose making excuses. That does happen and it can happen, but you just have to bear with it, and it's. But you shouldn't cut all of it off. And for example, if this side got messed up, maybe you can just trim the 2 sides down and leave the middle, right? Because according to Imam Malik, the beard is only this middle part, the goatee. Hence you might see some sheikhs around the world that they cut all this off and they only have a goatee, and people think, what kind of Mawlvi is he? Right? Because according to Imam Malik, the beard is only like the goatee area. Yeah? So
The middle chin.
yeah, the middle is a part of the chin. So there it's parallel to your matam, or you can say downwards, right? So at least grow that part to minimum. There's 3 fingers, 4 fingers. You know, even if you're not growing the sides, for example, this I mean, at least you'll be covered by one of the imams, right? For growing your beard from somewhere. Yeah. So even if the sides are like 2 and you're not ready to grow a beard, I'm not saying jump into it, because when you jump into it, mostly what happens is you end up shaving, and the people are like, "Tu Mawlvi mein for 2 days. What happened to you?" Yeah. So obviously you take it as a. For example, it took me 2.5 years to grow my beard, right, to a full length. But obviously I was 15 to 18 it took me. But some people might be older than that. But generally at 15 I had like a full beard I couldn't grow. But I wasn't ready, I wasn't comfortable, I was in school, you know, you feel like peer pressure and all that. So I just had like a grade 2, grade 3, 4, 5, 6, and then it took about 2 years to grow the full thing. So it depends on what kind of phase you're going through spiritually, you know, what kind of situation you're in. But at least aim for Imam Malik style from minimum. Even if the sides are not ready, just grow the middle to at least 2-3 fingers, and then when you, you know, your partner might like it as well, so you might feel a bit more comfortable growing it. When that happens.
I've got a question. You were saying about looking good for your partner. Nowadays society, some women don't like the beard, for example, and if you keep it and stuff like that, they might not like it. So what do you do about that? What kind of advice can you give for that?
That's a good question. That person just keeps with the bare minimum. Like bare minimum as in, he's qualified in the Sharia, but he's got her Razi as well. So in the Hanafi school, like I mentioned, like it's blended with the fashion and the, at least you're covering both. But sometimes obviously if some women I know that they hate beards, like this is the first time I got this question. And that they want the husband to shave the beard, and sometimes the question comes through my wife, like my friend said this and that, she doesn't like her husband to have a beard and he's grow a beard and so on. But Sharia is Sharia.
So
You have to set your standards. If you know, because there's certain things that if your partner really loved you, and generally they wouldn't expect you to compromise on the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yeah, that's a bottom line, right? And if they are expecting you, then they expect you to do other sacrifices of the Sharia as well. So now I'm not saying that go all out guns blazing at home, yeah, how dare you tell me what kind of woman you are. Like sometimes men get excited as well and they go to the other extreme. But at the same time, you use wisdom, hikmah, and you stay firm on the Sharia aspect of it, right? That's how you're going to have pious and righteous children. When you start slipping up, and this is one of the ills of our society today, that women control the houses, and that's how the family breaks down, or the children lose modesty, the daughters start dressing immodestly, is because the man's not playing a man role anymore, right? It might sound a bit undertaken, but that's the reality of it. Yeah, so because men don't act like men anymore. So when the children are young, the man's like bossy, is pushing the wife around. He needs to play his cards right from the start, basically. Right? So when the sons are grown up, the same size as him, the wife's like, "Akoma putarani now," and And then the guy's like, and this is naturally, this happens, and this is a fact. I've met loads of guys like that, and this and that, right? This happens, why? Because now the man's thinking, she's got her 3-4 sons with her, and you know what, they just, so when an issue happens within the house, that the man is right and his way should go, because he's always like saying, okay. Now when he needs to stand his ground, he has got the courage to stand his ground. And so that's how you set like standards within the Sharia as well, within your homes, that the Quran and Sunnah should be a benchmark. If your wife, whoever it is going against that, say, look, everything else, but I'm not going to compromise the deen. And then automatically your wife will learn to respect you for that. But when you're, falling in the trap again and again and say, okay, I'll do it this time, I can do it this time. She's not going to think of you as a man with self-respect. She'll be like, you know what, don't worry, I'll push him over and make him do it anyway. Even if something like, someone like, oh, your husband won't like that, then don't worry, I'll get him to do it. And now in so public, you feel embarrassed as well because she's talking down on you. They're going to be thinking. So this is something as a side note to keep in mind. But generally, when you apply the Sharia, apply it with wisdom, apply it with, hikmah as well. But at the same time, don't be extreme. Both extremes are not allowed. This is, we are ummah of moderation. Right? So sometimes people get too lenient and they don't read namaz. It's like calling Jandio. And they get too strict and they go home and start bashing bidah, shirk, haram, this, that, reading namaz, and then they lose their family that way as well. So the moderation is the best way, and the sunnah is the best way to apply that. I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grants us all the tawfiq to keep that in mind, inshallah. آمين. اللهم ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. اللهم إنا نسألك علما نافعا ورزقا طيبا وعملا متقبلا وصلى الله تعالى على حبيبه محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين.